So in this chapter, we're going to talk about basic input nodes, basic camera controls within World Machine. So you can hold or wheel the mouse wheel in or out to zoom. You can hold right click to pan. Now this is a brand new default scene, so we can select some of these nodes, hold shift and left click on them, click delete, say yes. Then also click these individual fields and delete those out as well. Those are starter windows, but for what we're going to do, we're just going to start from scratch. Now we need to add some inputs, so let's go up to generator, and on the far right, we have one of the more common nodes, the file input node. It's this little green disk, so click on that, and then you can drag that around your scene. Right now it's just an empty workspace, so it doesn't matter where you put it. Now you can double click and load an outside height map from either ZBrush, 3D Max, Crazy Bump, basically wherever you have a height map or displacement map. You could even go into Photoshop and sketch out a basic layout of your level, canyons or whatever, and then refine it later. So click load. We'll track down one of these height maps we already have prepared. You get your little 3D preview on the left side, and then you have some options on the right. Now let's go to altitude scaling, and you can go to full range. That'll take advantage of the entire range of your texture from black to white. And you just judge your preview on the left, and you can go to specific range and fine tune that or clamp it smaller. We can drop it down to 1400 meters if we want, and press enter to finalize. In this case, I'm going to jump back to full range since that's what I authored this height map for, and it's not destructive, so it actually brings it back to the full fidelity. Now this is one of the height maps we started with for the demo level, and we modified it later on. So I'll say OK. Now if you ever want to go to the 3D view and see a larger view, you click this button on the top, or you can hit F8. And the standard workshop view, or the device view, is where you hook up all the nodes together. And 3D view is where you'd kind of preview it. Now this is the preview resolution, so if you want to change it, you go to World Extends and Resolution and click that. And there's this +1 resolution. Some game engines use that, but for what we use and for CryEngine, we just want the actual file size, so we don't need to add the +1. And let's bump this up a little higher. For kind of production, you can use 2048, and this doesn't dictate the world size, it's just the fidelity of the texture. It's how detailed the height map will be, and also any texture maps, color maps, ambient occlusion that you'll get out of the World Machine. So 1024, like I said, is good for previewing within World Machine. It only takes a couple minutes to build. And then later on, once you're happy with the results, you can render out a higher resolution. So we'll say OK. I'm also going to go back to the device view on the top. And let's add a quick erosion filter, so we can see the kind of flow of the program and get an idea where we're headed with some of these lessons. So it's on the Favorites tab on the far right. You can click it and drop it into our scene. Now we'll click the height field output on the right of file input, and then you left click it again into erosion. It feels a little clunky at first because it's not a click and drag. It's a left click release and then another left click on the input. If you're ever curious of the descriptions, just use a mouse over. This is the most common one, height field. That's World Machine's bread and butter. It creates really nice height maps, and then it also uses those to create color maps as well. So that's plugged into the input on the left. Generally, the input's on the left, output's on the right, and masks are on the bottom, which we'll discuss in a later chapter. Now we can double click any one of the devices, just like the file input node. And a lot of this stuff is just really fun to experiment with. So after this demo, I recommend going through every option you're interested in, crank it left or right, and try to get the most experimentation possible. So right now I'm changing the erosion base duration and some of the rock hardness, make it more prominent. A lot of these you just play around with, get a better feel for them. There's also some really cool presets we can go into later. So let's say OK, go to our 3D view and then actually do a preview build by clicking the green button. This runs through all the devices and builds the network. Usually takes about 30 seconds to a minute. Now towards the end, on our actual demo level, we rendered out a 4096, which is, very high production level texture, and that took anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. Okay, quite a bit more detailed, but still not really production level, but you can kind of get an idea of some of the things going on with the erosion. So that's one of the manual file inputs. I had this mountain started in World Machine, and I had actually modified it slightly in ZBrush and kind of moved the form around and changed the proportions a little bit, and then brought it back into World Machine, which is not always the best thing. And I'd recommend checking our displacement height map videos just so you have a better understanding of that if you've never worked with them before. Also goes into rendering amount. Now I'm going to temporarily unhook the file input. This way we can use the same erosion on our new procedural node. So under generator, I'm using advanced purlin to start with, and that's the third option over. We double click it. This menu can seem overwhelming at first. There's a lot of stuff to tweak and play with. The first of which is tweaking the scale between boulders and continents. Also the elevation center, up or down, and the steepness will give you a lot better control of the range of those values. And again, it's moving them from left to right and seeing the effect in the 3D preview. And then later on, we'll talk about some macros in the later chapters on how to extract texture maps from this information. But right now, we're just going for something we think might be neat, and we'll change it later. We'll fine tune it. You can also, on the top right, check out some of these advanced purlin presets, and they have a lot of cool variety, and you can get a better understanding of what's actually going on in this menu because you can check out the settings that are applied. Canyons, usually get some really cool results. The top's clamped, has a nice flat sheared rock look. Taking the canyons like this and mixing it with some nice erosion, you can get some really cool effects. And we actually blended some of those effects in with our actual production level. We'll go over some more of these settings in the later chapter. I think this is good for now. See what we can do with this. Now let's hook this up to the erosion, and we'll click build again. Okay, so here's some interesting results. It's a little bit noisy. I'm not too happy with this one. Now let's just go back into erosion, try some other effects, and hopefully we can improve on this a bit. You can also leave your 3D preview open and click the settings on the bottom left. You just double click on those and you can change those and get a live full screen feedback. Now this is one of my favorite presets. I usually go back to this one. I feel like it solves the problem I just mentioned, where you have really noisy detail up close sometimes, and you want to worry more about the overall form from far away. And this kind of solves that problem. Now this other input node under generator called Veroni, I think it's Italian, I'm not sure, and go into our 3D view and bring the options up on the bottom left so that we can see the preview. You can already kind of see some of the cool angular designs that you can create. You can change some of these different styles and shapes. You really get some cool sharp angle definition, and then once you mix some good erosion with these, it creates some unexpected results. So even some of these abstract sci-fi cell, like F3 cell and F2 cell, there's no reason not to experiment with these, even if you're going for organic terrain. They might not be the most useful for terrain, but you can always mix them with other nodes, and maybe you'll get an interesting level out of it or interesting use. I think I'll go with F2, adjust the scale a little bit. So mess with the shape a little bit. And you'll kind of notice this looks like sphere booleans just cut out over and over again on this surface. So they probably, with this procedural generator, they're probably taking radial gradients and just cutting out the negative space from a height map to create these cool ridges and everything. So I'm going to plug in the same erosion I was happy with the advanced purlim into the Veroni. go into the full view and build this. So here's our Veroni with the erosion. And I think it's got some nice things going on. Really crisp ridge lines, more interesting shapes because of mixing the procedural with the erosion. So far, we've looked at the manual file input. We've looked at the advanced Perlin, which gives you the sliders and the different presets, and you get good control over elevation center and steepness. And then we've just taken a look at the Veroni, a little bit wackier, but that's my personal favorite. Now there's a couple more we're going to talk about. There's radial gradation, a standard ramp, flat gray, if you want to start with a neutral height value. And these could all be mixed together. Now the radial gradation, you can do some really cool things. And I originally started the demo level with a radial gradient to start sculpting the mountain. Hop back into the 3D view, and we have a really boring little mound. Let's see if we can't fix this up a little bit. So in our radial options, we have our Gaussian mode, spherical, diamond, pretty kind of pyramidal, square, cone. On the ones I use for the demo level, I started with the diamond, and you can drag in the radius for the base and figure out how large you want this main feature or mountain or whatever you intend it to be. You can also change the center of the entire object by clicking center, and you can move it around in its relation to your overall world. Now, this is similar to what I did on the demo level. We placed it towards the back end, so we had a lot of playable space in the front, and you had kind of enough space to move around. Now let's have a little fun and take some of these input nodes and blend them together using a combiner. So you go to the combiner menu up top. It's the second one over there. So this is pretty obvious how this works. You have two inputs and one output, and you mix them together. You can see how they're blending together by clicking on them individually, and then once you click on the combiner, you get the preview of how it's combining. But we can also have more control of how they mix together by clicking method. Right now it's average, which is a linear blend. Left is one of the inputs, right would be the other, and you can just mix the percentages. Now, additive adds the values together. So if it's on the far right at full strength, it's going to be both values at full strength. In this case, our actual radial grid hits the peak when it's at full range. So we really don't want to have a maxed out kind of plateau. Now subtract will take that same shape and actually cut it out, kind of like a subtraction boolean. And really this is similar to just playing around with layer effects in Photoshop. It's doing the same thing, but just to height maps, and you don't actually see the two maps at the same time. So play around with these, see if you like any of the results. So far, I've had more luck with average, add, and subtract. The other ones haven't found too much use, but I still think it's worth playing around. You might have better luck than I did. So I like add in this case. We can get the top right around there. It's a little bit of a plateau. That way, once the erosion knocks it down, it should form a nice point. And a lot of the detail, like the cuts out of the center of the mountain, are coming from the Veroni. And you can see that negative shape, how it affects when it blends in. So let's give it another build with the erosion added in now. So now we see our old ridge line, but it's with the mixed in with the radial mountain. This is all procedural, so it's the cleanest possible way to work. It's really nice to be able to create stuff like this directly in World Machine, so you're not having quality loss, or you're not working with 8-bit height maps that might be stair-stepping. It's just the cleanest possible starting point. Now, the one last input node I'm going to show you is the layout generator. It also allows you to create really specific shapes without having to go to an outside program. So let's check that out. Let's hop back in our device view on top, and it's the first option under generator, and it's the very first option. Now this is actually one of the most useful things, I think, in World Machine. You double click, it'll give you kind of a blank brown view of your world. This is where our world is within this white square. Now we don't have anything in our scene yet, and we can use these basic shapes to build up some forms. So we can see the preview, how it's affecting. By default, they range from black to white, and the top being the highest point. You can see how they blend together, and of course this isn't very practical for what we're doing. So you can click on shape list, give you the option to start selecting these and clicking delete. Now this whole view is a little bit cumbersome, so it'll probably take a couple sessions getting used to it. Generally, when I create something, I've had the best luck just drawing the shape with the polygon tool. Do a little Pac-Man face and hit enter to finalize. Oh, actually, right click is to finish your shape. Now you click shape list and choose your shape. It should be updated in the shape hierarchy. So select the shape over here, and then you select the little pencil icon, which is shape properties. In this, you can adjust the fall off, which is the third option down. This is really important, how far out the height difference changes, the spread. The opacity is kind of the strength. It's also very close to height. So I would either just adjust height or the opacity strength. So if you don't want it to go over a certain amount of meters, maybe you planned out your mountain is a certain height and you want these plateaus to be half, you can keep track of meters, or you can just eyeball it. On the bottom, you can have some preset curves, and you can, if you've ever worked with curves, these should make sense to you. The far left is just a linear, then you have a ramp up and a kind of a bubble, and then an S curve. You can also blend between all of those on the bottom slider. So just play around with those, get the right feel you're looking for. It's pretty self-explanatory. You can also click edit and adjust your own curve. But these tools are more than enough. So let's go ahead and move on. Now I'm going to just, with polygon tool still selected, I can just keep adding shapes and building them up. So you can see how you can manually add a bunch of terrace plateaus, or you can make your own canyons. And this stuff could be mixed back in with the radial gradients and whatnot. And then you just keep using the shape hierarchy list to adjust the individual heights and figure out their relationship compared with the others. I'm always looking out for cool intersections of shapes and masses. So this is a great way to visualize something really quickly. Now let's clean this up a little bit, and we'll try to make something a little more practical now that we've gotten an overview of the basic tools here. Like I said, sometimes deleting these things is a little cumbersome, but you just select them in shape hierarchy and click delete. Now, instead of doing polygonal shapes, you can do an actual spline. This is great for really sharp mountain ridges, similar to what we had just gotten out of the Veroni, but your fall off radiates out from individual vertices here. So at the vertice tip, it'll be the sharpest line possible. So let's adjust the fall off distance here. Probably not too crazy. Little creepy snake monster here. This might be interesting with this larger fall off. I'm curious what this bubble kind of kinked shape will do once we add erosion. And remember, that's what we want to do. We want to experiment and see if you can find out new techniques. After all, in working in game environments, you want the most variety possible. You want people to feel like they're progressing through a game and having new experiences. So now we hook the layout generator up to the same erosion we've used. And let's crank up the erosion base duration. I think this is year based. I'm not exactly sure how accurate that is. And we'll also crank up the erosive power. Generally, dragging the sliders to the right is usually more powerful, a stronger version of that function. So let's hop back in 3D view, give this a build. And yeah, I like these results as well. It's really hard to mess up with the World Machine plus Power erosion. So that just about sums up our chapter. Again, we talked about a lot of different input nodes, how to use them, how to use combiners, experimenting with some of the options with procedural generation, as well as erosion and some of the presets. Thank you.